We're very lucky. We have our own monsoon. For a monsoon retreat. Great. It's like India. No, it's very little to dry. Okay. So, like yesterday, let's start with some breathing, just to calm the mind. Let go of any disturbing, disruptive thoughts. To make sure we make the most out of this session, the rest of the day. Think that I will use this time to get a better understanding of myself, how I exist, and of how everything else exists. Remove all my misapprehensions. And to replace them with unconditional love and compassion. Eventually purify my mind from all obscurations. From all hindernesses. transform it into the fully awakened mind of a Buddha. So with this in mind, let's recite the prayers together.
Page 10, Refuge. Once in Hippo, once in Tibet. בבודה, בדרמה ובקהילה העילאית, אבקש מקלט עד לימה. באמצעות המצבורים של הקשבה לדרמה, להשיג בודהיות ולהועיל ליצורים הנודדים. סנגה צ'ודן סוגי צ'ונם לה, צ'אנצ'ו בדו דני קיאבסוצ'י, דאי צ'נזו קיפה צוננקי, דולה פנצ'יר סנגה דרופשו. סנגה צ'ודן סוגי צ'ונם לה, Changchu Badu Dani Kyapsuchi Dagi Jimso Kipe Sonanki Dola Penche Sange Drupasho. For immeasurables, לא יזכו כל בעלי התודעה בחושר ובגורמי העושר. לא ייפרדו כל בעלי התודעה מסבל ומגורמי הסבל. ולעולם לא ייפרדו כל בעלי התודעה מעושר מקולקל. לא יפתחו כל בעלי התודעה את מידת ההשתוות ללא מצוא פנים של התעשרות ושל סלידה.
Sorry for that. I didn't realize you had to go on. Okay. Coming back to this here. Well, first of all, I'd like to say something about the silence. I didn't talk about it yesterday, but just, well, actually Nissim once suggested that, so I took this over. It's in my note. Remember, for Israel, always explain why the silence. So, yeah, just to understand that, of course it's nice to talk to old friends and be with them, but, well, and exchange news, etc. But to use this time actually to the fullest, so we can kind of turn inwards, reflect on what we've learned. So in that way, it's very helpful to keep the silence. In particular, this being a retreat setting, it is the time between the sessions. So the sessions are when we get together, either when you just meditate or during classes. Those are the sessions, those are the parts of the retreat, as in like getting together, doing the actual work. But it's said that the in-between sessions are even more important. Equally important, or depending on how you deal with it, even more important. Because that's when you digest everything and you take it inwards, you internalize it. And those in-between periods, since they're longer, then whatever you do with that, you carry that with you and hopefully make a change in your life. So therefore, to keep silence is so helpful because you just keep focused on what you're doing. And so I'll ask you also, after the session, to consider something in particular that you could do during the session. So then the silence will help you to do this more effectively. So let's try to the best of our ability to keep the silence. Okay? To make the most out of this time here. Okay, great. Also, I want to thank Vada for putting this booklet together. She did a really nice job. And like I said, we can only do half of this year. In the 26th chapter, it's already hardcore Buddhism. It basically takes you into past and future lives. Now I want to see who struggles with past and future lives. Could you raise your hands if you find it difficult? Don't be shy to raise your hand. Okay, fair enough. Yeah. Alright, yeah. Okay, so that's very natural. All of us have struggled at some point with this idea. Well, some more, some less. I definitely struggled with it for a long time. So I totally get it, and you can still study Buddhism, of course, without fully accepting it. A lot of ideas are helpful just right here and there. But since we do all have Well, even if we don't struggle with that, there's certain degrees of conviction. So it's still something we should not ignore. And I personally feel like Buddhism cannot really fully work without reincarnation. I mean, there are places now in Germany, for instance, in some centers where reincarnation is just totally ignored. But I say this jokingly, but I really believe this. This is like saying, I'll make really good hummus, but without chickpeas. Right? So the one very important ingredient is missing. Of course, you can still talk about certain things, etc., but a lot of it is based on the fact that we'll continue on. We came from whatever was before, and we'll continue on. And I want to say a few words about this, and maybe at some point when I finish translating the text, I actually want to teach on just one course on past and future lives based on the Pramanavartika. It's just going to be on that. But for that, I want to finish this particular section to summarize it and make it more suitable for a weekend course. Because the arguments in there are amazing. It's not just about continuum of mind, but also the relationship of mind and body. So, but my take on this in general, and many of you have heard me say this so many times, you cannot disprove the existence of past and future lives. Also, you cannot prove to us, you cannot prove the existence of it either. There is evidence, there is proof for this, but your mind needs to be flexible enough to understand that proof. Right now, talking about past and future lives is like trying to prove the existence of the color blue to someone who's been blind since birth. Right? I mean, it's like impossible. Of course it's possible to prove that there's blue, but our mind needs to have a certain capacity, a certain ability to see this. And as long as it doesn't have that, for us it's like, don't know. The reasonings don't necessarily have the effect that it may have on other people whose mind are more, kind of have engaged in that topic more, and they find these reasonings, they're like, wow, that's it, that makes total sense. But if there are future lives, so there's a 50% chance there are, 50% chance there aren't. I don't know whether it's 50%, but there is a chance there are and the chance there not. If there are and you're not prepared, think about it. It's like if we were all to believe there's no tomorrow. Okay? There's no tomorrow. We all believe there's no tomorrow. Tomorrow we're all gone. So we live our life in a certain way. But if there is tomorrow, we would do things differently. We would plan ahead a little bit. Okay? So there is no loss in preparing for tomorrow, even if there isn't. It's a lot worse if there is tomorrow and we're not prepared. We give up we spend all our money, I don't know, whatever, eat all our food, and we're not prepared for tomorrow. So maybe the example doesn't work that well, but in a sense, if life goes on, and whatever we've accumulated, our actions of body, speech and mind, have left a residue in our mind, and we'll experience that, boy, now this is the time to prepare. This is the best time to prepare. We're well, we are healthy, we're strong. So we, in the same way as we pay into a pension fund, in the same way as we prepare for older age, I don't know, we exercise, we do certain things, so we do prepare for the future. And now, if there is future lives, well, we have to get ready for that too. Take it as a possibility. And also, as you've heard me say many, many times, living your life as if there is a future life is a win-win situation. You're not losing out on anything. It's a win-win situation in the sense that if there is no future life, there's nothing. When we die, everything's done. Well, still, if we live as if our actions have consequences in a future life, well, we live a more ethical, more moral life. We're a good example to our children. We leave behind some legacy, some positive legacy, because we were moral and ethical, not harming others, etc. And then when we die without much regret. Then if there's heaven, hell, as Abrahamic faith seem to suggest, I mean, you can go be with God or go into some kind of horrible state, well, we know where we're going. Probably more likely to be with God. And if there's the Buddhist reincarnation, there's, well, we have a good start and be so basically it helps to think there are. No matter, even if there aren't, it doesn't matter. Now I want you to do this also, like of course if you already believe there are past and future lives, then this part will be easy. But if there are, this is what happens. So the Buddha very clearly laid out how we come from a previous life to this life and how we continue on. This is the 26th chapter. Like I told you, it goes right into the very traditional ideas of Buddhism. And His Holiness starts with this chapter, well, for several reasons. Well, first of all, why are we doing what we're doing? Who cares we have misapprehension? Right? Actually, if there's just one life, okay, it seems unbearable and it's difficult, etc. Yes, of course. But it would be much worse if there were lots of them. Think about it. All our problems in this lifetime we try to deal with. If we have thousands of lives like that ahead, maybe even worse. So it makes sense. We need to look into it. What is the cause of it? Can I do something? Can I make some changes? And of course, making changes in the sense of removing our misapprehension of reality doesn't mean we go out of existence, but we have a more satisfied, a more content existence. We have an existence where we get the things we actually want. Okay? So that is one reason for why His Holiness starts with this 26th chapter. Okay, why is this important? In which context does the misapprehension of reality play a part in our own life? How is this for me personally relevant? And actually the 6th chapter, of course, it's also an extensive explanation of the Four Noble Truths. What we're going through now is an extensive explanation of the Four Noble Truths. Now you may think, the Four Noble Truths, I've heard about them. I know about the Four Noble Truths, right? But this is like the way of listening to teachings like that. You don't listen with an academic mind that wants to receive more information. I'm pretty sure what I tell you in terms of the 12 links, I mean, you've already heard this. It's not like totally new to you. But it's like when you take a Dharma teachings, of course, I'm not a teacher, I'm not a qualified teacher. We're just, in Tibetan it's called level up. We're just kind of discussing things like, equals, we're just going through things. No, but if you talk about like a real teacher, like a Lama, for instance, take for instance His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So that's what I'm saying. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama, His Holiness teaches the Four Noble Truths so many times, and these high Geshes and high Lamas, they show up every time. Do you think they don't know the Four Noble Truths? Of course they can recite them backwards, forwards, left to right. I mean, they've studied all the different commentaries. So why do they listen again? Well, they listen with a certain attitude. They don't listen with an academic kind of mind, but they take it straight to heart. So of course, if you're with His Holiness, that's a very different effect. You do that and then you listen to what His Holiness says with a sense of like His Holiness is talking straight to me. And you listen with your heart. So where is this true in my own life? How is this true in my own life? So unfortunately, of course, if you were with His Holiness, it'd be so much greater. But even if you're just with a friend, like a Dharma friend, so even in that moment, there's a way to listen to it with your heart. So this is relevant to myself. This is true for myself. And it has a totally different effect on your mind. If you listen not with this intellectual kind of mind, but I don't know, for lack of a better word, with your heart, with a self-reflective kind of attitude. And of course, hopefully you learn something new on top of it, about the 12 links. Also with regard to the 12 links, so first of all it explains why our misapprehension is so important. I just said that. It's an extensive version of the Four Noble Truths, but it's also in response to a chapter or a verse in one of the chapters that preceded the 26th chapter, which is chapter 24, verse 4. Whoever sees dependent arising also sees suffering, its origin, cessation, and the path. right? Okay, so 24, it's maybe translated slightly differently. No, it's the wrong verse. Actually, it's the wrong, sorry. I wrote down the wrong verse. Anyway, never mind, I have to look it up, which verse it is. But anyway, it says, whoever sees dependent arising, also it's probably not 24, it's probably 21. But whoever sees dependent arising also sees suffering, its origin, cessation, and the path. Alright, so that's what it says at some point before. And so, if you understand dependent arising, you get to see all this, but we need to look at this. But it also helps us to understand, when we understand the 12 links, that there's no solid I. Because they're just causes and conditions giving rise to something else. But the solid I that is reborn, or this solid I that does this, that, and the other, it disappears in that process of explaining the 12 links. So you see how they're... Pardon?
It's verse number 40.
Oh, it's verse number 40. 40?
40 and 24.
Ah, okay. For one who emptiness makes sense, everything makes sense. No, that's different. For one to whom emptiness does not make sense, nothing makes sense. 40. 40.
Page 25.
Ah, you're right. Whoever sees dependent arising sees suffering in its origin and its cessation as well as the path. Alright, you're right. Yeah, 40. Okay, great. So it is in here. Slightly different to the version I wrote down, but never mind. Okay, so the point is that, therefore, understanding why the misapprehension is relevant. Secondly, understanding, receiving an extensive explanation of the Four Noble Truths, and the 12 links help us to understand that our misapprehension of reality is responsible for all our problems, etc., but at the same time that there is no inherent self that goes through these different stages. Okay. Now, if you look at verse 1, if you look at the first verse, obscured by ignorance, we perform 3 types of compositional actions. It's also another translation would be formative actions. Compositional or formative actions. Anyway, formative, as in forming something. Well, if compositional works better, you can use either. So, it doesn't. Okay. Anyway, so, obscured by ignorance, we perform 3 types of actions, 3 types of compositional actions that lead to rebirth. Driven by compositional karmic actions, we wander in migratory existence. Actually, in Tibetan, the first is 3 types of just formations, 3 types of formations, or 3 types of compositional factors, basically. It's hard to translate this, but it's basically saying we accumulate different karmic actions. That's really what it says. So, formative, as in like, of the aggregates, we talk about, for instance, compositional factor. So that includes our actions, our volitional actions of body, speech and mind. Okay? So, as a person, we consist of a mind and body complex, and that includes a lot of different aspects, especially, well, the body is very straightforward. We have a body, okay. And of course it's a complicated body, but in general it can be summarized under the word body. But then psychologically, our mind is so intricate, so many different types of awareness, different ways in which they manifest, different activities the different types of awareness engage in. And also any mental activity leaves a residue. It doesn't get lost. Within the mind, so within our mental consciousness in particular, the sense consciousnesses are very neutral, as in like they just perceive the raw data. So what is going on around us? Of course, what we perceive with our sense consciousnesses is not what's exactly out there. Okay? So colors and shapes and so forth, they're just an interpretation of reality. So our sense consciousnesses don't perceive everything that is there, and they perceive it in a very unique way. Okay? And we don't even know whether other humans perceive exactly what we perceive. We don't even know that in terms of colors. Are the colors the same? The same shades, the same shape, the same shapes. So colors, shapes. Just because we call it the same We just assume the other person sees the same. But that's a very coarse, we use a very coarse word, say blue, right? We use the word blue. But what we all individually perceive can be so different. There's so many shades of blue. How do I know you perceive the same that I do? I just assume you do. I assume you do because I have a misperception of things existing objectively out there. And so therefore what I see, everyone else needs to see. This assumption goes right back to our misapprehension. I believe there's this reality out there and I just see what's there. And since I do, you do too. So we all perceive the same thing. Okay? It goes right back to this basic misapprehension. But the point is that every time we see something, we hear something, etc., there is a mental activity that takes place. We only notice when we try to meditate and try to stop that mental activity. That's when we notice what's going on. But there are thoughts racing all the time. There's this constant narrative. Those are our thoughts. It's like this, it's like that, it's not like this, etc. So, and then of course giving rise to afflictive views and afflictive emotions. Afflictive views are, well, based on the basic misapprehension, perceiving phenomena to exist objectively, etc., which is already an afflictive view, gives rise to other afflictive views. Views of that which is impermanent being permanent and static. Views of that which is in the nature of actually bringing us suffering, we perceive it to be in the nature of real happiness, etc. So there are so many misapprehensions of reality, and they also give rise to afflictive emotions such as anger, attachment, jealousy, etc. So it is that root ignorance, that misapprehension, that basic misapprehension, out of which lots of other afflictive views, afflictive emotions arise, and they give rise to different actions. 3 actions, mainly on the mind, but because of the mental consciousness kind of governing, controlling our mind and our speech in our body, then it gives rise to saying something in a certain situation, physically act in a certain way. A lot of our actions can be neutral, but they can also be virtuous or non-virtuous. Okay. Now, this is here we're saying in specific with regard to this obscuration of reality. We perform 3 types of actions: body, speech, and mind, and they lead to rebirth. Some of them, not all of them. Some of them are very strong, and they are responsible for a future rebirth, a potential future rebirth. So, in the past, before you were born a human being, in the past you perceived, you did something, there was a certain occasion, certain circumstances that gave rise to the misapprehension of reality, which is, and the misapprehension we will deal with. But this is just saying, first understanding that this misapprehension arises every now and then, and it motivates us, and the process will be explained in the next chapter, what exactly happens. But just for now, to keep it simple, misapprehension gives rise to an action of body, speech and mind, which if it's a strong virtuous or strong non-virtuous actions, neutral actions are never as powerful. Neutral actions, so very virtuous, very non-virtuous actions, they're really powerful. And neutral action can never be responsible for a rebirth, because they're never really powerful. Strong virtuous ones, they're strong emotional responses. Strong non-virtuous ones, they have strong emotional responses. Neutral is neither virtuous nor non-virtuous, which means neither do they lead to a happy experience nor an unhappy experience. Just neutral, when it doesn't feel like there's any feeling, right? You just sit there and you don't feel pleased, you don't feel not pleased. You're just kind of neutral. Okay? But those actions that lead to those experiences, those neutral experiences, they don't cause any rebirth. As I said, they're not strong enough. So it's either a very powerful positive action, going out of your way to help another person, possibly unconditionally, without expecting anything back, could leave a very powerful residue on your mental consciousness and potentially lead you to